Okay, we will go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. Thank you for attending this event or watching it later. It is sponsored by the New England Society of Professional Journalists chapter. And my name is Nicole Prano, and I'm the president of the Georgia chapter, and now located in Nashville. I've recently moved, so now I'm a Middle Tennessee girl. We're here tonight with Lane DeGregory, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer for the Tampa Bay Times and prefers telling stories about people in the shadows. She went to work with a 99-year-old man who still swept out a seafood warehouse, hung out beneath a bridge with a colony of sex offenders, followed a feral child who was adopted, and many other stories. She is also the author of The Girl in the Window and Other True Tales, an anthology with tips for finding, reporting, and writing nonfiction narratives. And she teaches at the University of South Florida at the Poynter Institute. So, Lane, let's go back to where it all started. Tell me about growing up. You grew up in DC, kind of around the time Watergate was unfolding. Tell me about when you began becoming interested in journalism and maybe what journalism background when you were a child kind of had an effect on you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. When Watergate was happening. I was in kindergarten. And my dad worked for the federal government. And so he just thought that Woodward and Bernstein were like the heroes of the world to find out all the malfeasance that was happening in the government and bringing down President Nixon. And he would read the Washington Post to me and my sister while we were eating Cheerios. And so we were, we were little, 5 or 6, but we were caught up in this whole saga and very aware that these young journalists were the ones that were bringing down the president of the United States. So I'm like 5 or 6 years old. I'm already super nosy and curious, and I already know I like to write stories. And so I remember talking to my mom and dad and being like, oh my God, so you could like ask anybody anything you want and you could write stories and everybody would read them. And like, that was like the calling. When I was 6 years old, I said, I'm going to do that. That's exactly what I want to do. My mom was an English teacher, so she was very big on, reading and writing. And my dad's very gregarious. So he would always chat up the waitresses and ask them the story of their lives. And I think, those two parents kind of influenced that for sure. But I just loved having a license to like talk to people and ask questions. And I loved the thought that like lots of strangers would read my writing. You know what I mean? I just thought that would be a really cool way to spend your time. And other than babysitting, all my jobs were in newspapering. So like in high school, I worked at a local paper and I took obits over the phone. I pasted up pages. I sold car ads. I just wanted to be in a newsroom. And then I was editor of a high school paper, and then I was editor of the college paper at the University of Virginia, which was kind of great because there was no journalism school at UVA. So the monkeys got to run the zoo. We had like 400 students on the staff, including like medical students and law students and, all different disciplines. So it was a really cool, like, mishmash of brains. It wasn't just a bunch of journalists. And then so it's 33 years. I've been a daily newspaper journalist ever since I kind of made my way down the East Coast from Virginia to North Carolina and then in Florida. I've just had my 23rd anniversary at the Tampa Bay Times.
That is such a long time to remain
Such a long time.
in one place, because I think we've talked about this before. You kind of these days see people go from place to place over time, and you don't see that kind of institutional sticking around that once was.
Yeah.
So taking it a little bit further back though, before all of this time, tell me about the time that you and your sister in elementary school started a newspaper.
Well, yeah, we did have one. And I was like, I really wanted to start our own little newspaper. And so my sister liked to take pictures, and my mom would type it. And we would just go. I think we interviewed the janitor and we interviewed the lunch ladies, and we would just do little profiles on people at the school. And then my mom would type it up and my sister would put a picture in, and my dad would take it to work and like illegally Xerox it, back on like purple mimeograph paper that I'm sure he wasn't supposed to do. And then we'd all sit around together and staple it on the weekends. I think we did, I don't know, 4 or 5 issues, but the whole family would sit around and staple it, and then we'd pass it out at school. And I love that idea that you can watch people read your stories. I remember even in elementary school, but then in college, I would get up early to get there when the paper got to the cafeteria because I just want to see people reading my stuff. So You don't get to do that as much anymore, but
Well, you get to see, I think, all the digital analytics of people reading your stories are the is the comparison these
yeah, that's it. You just give it a little click.
yeah. Um, so from the stories of the janitor and the lunch lady to all of the different stories that you've told now, probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of stories that you've written at this point, Shirley, tell me about seeking those people out and putting a face to the events that are happening. Um, how do you find these stories and give us some tips and what about these people draws you to them?
Well, like you said, I do like writing about people in the shadows. I'm so happy they've never made me cover politics, or people who are outperforming. I like the realness of people who aren't in the media very often. I mean, my job has shifted some in the 23 years I've been here. It used to be much more tell whatever story you want to tell. And a lot of times now it's more like put a face on an issue, right? Or find somebody in the news. So I feel like the types of stories I'm looking for are different, certainly more timely than timeless, for better or worse. But I mean, I think being in a community for 23 years is probably the biggest asset I have. And I'm sure, like, I can't say that to everybody out there who can afford to do that, but the whole idea about write about what I had two little boys when I moved here who were 2 and 3. So I met all these other parents, through preschool and then through Little League and then through school plays and then through high school marching band. And so I had a huge network of parents. If I needed a doctor or a lawyer or a scientist, I knew somebody who knew somebody, you know what I mean? And then also kind of tapping into a lot of the organizations here. So once you go and meet people in the children's board or you go to the juvenile welfare board, and I would go to their meetings and kind of sit in and pass out my card and tell them what kind of stories I was looking for. And people to be able to have my face, not just like sending an email. I think that helped a lot. And over the years, I had several, maybe probably a dozen PR people that would, you know, like send me stories, send me good stories, not just like a pitch, but like say, oh, I found this. I thought it would be a story that you would like that type of thing. So that's been super helpful. And then we do this, like now that I'm on this enterprise team where we're kind of supposed to be spinning stuff off the news, we do this like exercise of stakeholders where we put the issue in the middle. So, abortion or climate change or election fraud or whatever it is, book banning has been a big one in Florida. So you put that thing in the middle and then you go around and find as many people as you can who have something at stake in that and try to explode all of those possibilities to find, whether it's the librarian in the book ban or the kid who can't get a book or the church lady trying to ban the book, or the superintendent at the meeting being shouted at, or just all the different people who have something that would make them care about that issue or that would give them a different viewpoint, and then try to find, I after 30 something years, I've been like, okay, what hasn't been done? What is the side of this that hasn't been shown? And that's usually where I try to drill down, because I mean, some of these issues just keep happening again and again and again. I've covered like 6 mass shootings. How do you do that differently? Climate change. Everybody's covering that from every perspective. So I think that's, to me, is it something surprising or new or a different perspective? That's when I get excited about.
Tell me about some of your favorite stories that you've done. I think, you probably have your biggest ones, of course, and we'll get into some of those, but maybe some of the ones that maybe we haven't even, begun to expect, but that you stick in the back of your mind that you're like, this one.
But during COVID, sorry, I'm coughing during COVID. During COVID, we really switched to different types of storytelling. We were doing much smaller scene pieces, where it was like reported and written in a day, or it was like just a moment in time type thing. And I think some of my favorites from then were these little tiny moments. Like I covered, I live on the main street in my little tiny town in Florida, and right across from the window where I'm sitting right now, it was the little food pantry. And I was watching people all day long from sun up to the middle of the night coming, taking food and dropping off food and taking food and dropping off food. So me and a photographer did a day in the life of the food pantry. And it was so fun because we made the pantry was like the character, and it was just, I think it was from 8 in the morning until midnight, I guess. And we sat on my deck and we like hung out with Coke and coffee and just watched when people would come up. we'd go talk to him. But there were so many different people needing the food pantry during COVID. That it ended up telling all these different stories of people of all different means and abilities. And it was a great kind of a melting pot in a weird way. So the food pantry story was I liked it because it was different. I thought I hadn't seen that story. The first person one I ever did, I don't like doing first person normally, but my editor had told me to write about my son lost a little stuffed elephant out the car window. And when he was 4. And so it was this quest of a mom of like, do you save the elephant and be a hero, or do you teach the kid a lesson? And because I kept telling him, roll up the window, don't dangle the elephant out the car. That story got a ton of response from other parents and people who had stuffed animals that they loved. So that one was really fun. I've gotten to do so many cool things. I think that's part of the job that I love so much. Like, I got to go surfing. I don't know how to surf. I got to go in the top of a water tower and in a cave, and I got to go hang out with commercial fishermen bringing in shrimp, and just all kind of experiences like that. That maybe the story wasn't my favorite, but the experiences still, are kind of priceless. And I tell the college kids I teach that, like, you're never going to make a lot of money as a journalist, or at least unless you're some superstar. But you'll make enough to live on, and you're so rich in experiences. The rewards of all the types of people you get to meet, and all the types of things you get to do. And for my son is a drama teacher and actor, and we talk about like how you get to inhabit these different worlds as a journalist and an actor. Like, one day I'm with a cop, and the next day I'm in the jail talking to a murderer, and then the next day I'm out on a boat with a dolphin researcher. It's so fun to get to span so many different worlds for stories. I think, just for the long answer to your question, the stories that I'm most proud of are the ones that make a difference, that change something, that get help for somebody, that make people see the world in a different way. I think one of the reasons I was drawn to People in the Shadows is because a lot of people assume things, about homeless people, or people who are struggling, or people who ride the bus, or whatever it is. And it's like, I want to bring that humanity to all the readers, so they have an appreciation for how hard it is for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell me a little bit about one of the things you were saying more in depth? You were just watching the people who came to the food pantry, and I know some of the tips and stuff that you've given before have been about taking the time just to observe, just to maybe even on a day off, be in the community, that sort of thing. Go a little bit more in depth on that tip for people.
I mean, I think a lot of the stories that come to the newsroom naturally are because people send out press releases, is because the organization has a PR person, or because someone's like, here, cover my story. I think the ones that you can find organically, whether you're just taking your dog for a walk, or you're out at the mall with your grandmom or whatever, if you pay attention, right, to what people are. I'm a really big eavesdropper. Like, what are people talking about in line? What are people talking about at the restaurant? What is the common bubble up on people's brains that you could maybe tap into that for a moment? One of my colleagues did this hilarious story in the early 2000s about how all these little boys were getting their hair dyed. And it was because she couldn't get an appointment with her hairdresser, because she's like, oh my God, there's this fad. These middle school boys are all coming and getting their hair dyed. And she started calling around all these other places around Tampa Bay. We're like, oh my God, this whole new clientele of hair dye. So sometimes it's just like off your own life too. You know what I mean? Like, just wondering about something. But yeah, I think I love being able to tap into whatever people are already wondering about or talking about.
That sounds like it came a little bit from your upbringing. From you said your dad would always be talking to people, asking questions.
Well, in both sides, and you're totally insightful, Nicole, because my mom's not going to watch this, so I can say this. My dad would want to know everybody's backstory, and my mom would want to judge it. And so I think I went in saying, like, you don't know why that poor man is homeless, Mom. You don't know what happened to that woman, And so I think it was definitely try to counterbalance my mother's assumption by saying, let's just go talk to them. Let's go see what their story really is. So yeah, it's definitely a combo of that.
Interesting. I think that's so funny how our upbringing shape us in that way.
Totally. Yes.
So we've talked about all of the different stories, but I think one that we have to dig deep on here is your Pulitzer Prize-winning story, The Girl in the Window. Uh, in your book, you tell a story that most people haven't heard yet, probably, about the process of writing this story. Can you share that with us today about how the reporting kind of came to be and a piece of it that was kind of key in the end?
Oh, you mean the part where I was being a bad journalist? Yeah, so I mean, this story came to me from a PR person, and I guess here's a tip: like, you can really train PR people for what you want, right? Like, she would send me a press release every year that said, "Oh, we're going to put up 250 pictures in the mall or the church or the video arcade of all these foster kids who need homes." And I kept telling her, like, "Okay, cool, I'll make a news brief for you. You know, it'll be on the back of B3. 250 kids need homes." I said, if you can help me find one single child or one single family that like really has something at stake in this, let's put a face on this issue, right? Like, let's see somebody who either really, really needs a home or really, really needs a kid. And so I told her this, I swear, probably 3 years in a row. And I kept saying, all right, if you can help me find somebody, you know, because all that stuff is private usually, right? You don't get much more than like, this is an 8-year-old girl. So she called me, I remember, on like a Super Bowl Sunday. And she was like, I think we have the story you've been looking for. We have a feral child in the Heart Gallery, and she'd been doing the Heart Gallery, which is the kids who are up for adoption, for like 25 years. And she said, I've never seen a feral child like this. I've never seen a kid who's been almost neglected to death, basically. And she's like, I think it would be a great story to bring awareness to how other people can help these children and what the myriad needs of this group is, you know. So she actually she helped me. And this has never happened in 20 something years of reporting when I did this. She and the social worker who were working with the little girl's name was Danny, helped me broker with the family. They drove to the interview with us. They sat and introduced us. They showed them other work that me and the photographer had done to kind of like say, here, these legit journalists you should trust, you know. And they really helped knock in the door to let us get inside and follow the story. And so we followed this little girl. She got adopted, and we followed her for 6 months after she got out of the hospital and got adopted into this home. And we thought we were good, right? We found the cop who found her. We found the social worker who found her. We made a list, I think, of like 30 people who touched her life, everybody from different foster care workers to doctors to neighbors and stuff like that. And we had all this reporting that we'd done. And then the story starts with the cop taking her out of the house. And I got about ready to write it. And my editor said, well, what about the birth mother? And I was like, what? And he's like, you need to go find her. He called her Boo Radley, like from To Kill a Mockingbird. You know, he's like, she's this person that everyone's projecting bad stuff on, but you don't really know her story. Don't judge, right? Number one rule of journalism, and my mother, don't judge. But I didn't want to meet her. Like, I was so mad at her. Like, and as a mother myself, and my little boy was the same age, I was like having overwhelming mom guilt for not going to his little league game, you know, or missing his friend's birthday party because I had to work. And here's this mom who just like left her child in a garage, like on the floor with bugs and cockroaches and everything. So I didn't want to meet this woman. I thought, well, we'll just start the story with the cop who rescues her, you know. And my editor was super vehement, like, we can't know how far Danny's come if we don't know how she got there. And he's like, don't come back and show your face in this newsroom until you find the birth mother. So he shamed me. He shamed me and the photographer into tracking her down, ultimately finding her, knocking on her door, and realizing she was like so incredibly grateful that we wanted to tell her side of the story. And it was such a bad on me as a reporter, right? Like, how dare I not want to get all sides of the story? It was my own judgment or anger clouding my journalistic sense of what I needed to do for the story. She not only provided me that whole perspective about what happened and how her house got so bad, but she also gave me this trash bag full of documents that was all of Danny's medical records, including like her birth certificate, her APGAR score, her tests that showed she was totally normal and functioning at birth. And then she had the court papers that showed her scores and what happened, her medical diagnosis and prognosis, and the psychiatrist's evaluation, and all this stuff that I wouldn't have been able to get because of HIPAA violations, right? I wouldn't have even been able to request it as a Freedom of Information Act. She gave it to me in like a trash bag and let me take it home. And so if I hadn't gone to get the birth mother, not only would I not have had the background, I wouldn't have had all the records, you know, that proved her condition. And it gave me an ending, it kind of gave me an ending because she asked about Danny. And it was like, oh my God, after all that, she cared enough to ask, you know? So I will be forever grateful to my editor for forcing me to go find Boo Radley and really complete the reporting for that story. Like, so many readers told me it's in 3 sections, and the last section is the birth mother. And so many people told me that that was their favorite part, that like that's the part that was the most powerful. So everybody needs a good editor, right?
Yeah, it definitely it proves that, no matter how long you've been doing it, everybody needs an editor.
Check yourself, yes.
Tell us a little bit about how Danny is doing today, and are you still in contact with the family who adopted her?
Yeah, so we went, well, there's a whole long story about Oprah, how I couldn't talk to them for 3 years because they went on Oprah, but I will not bash Oprah here to tell you that. So we waited 3 years after the first story to be able to get in touch with them again. And we went to visit them. They moved from Florida to Tennessee. They were living in Lebanon, Tennessee.
Oh, that's close.
Yeah. So we went to Tennessee. They were living on a farm with goats and donkeys and horses and stuff. And Danny was, so what was she like? And she was 12 or 13 because I remember she was just getting her period. And that was really, really hard because by then the mom, Diane, had kind of extricated herself. Like, I think she thought they could like love whatever was wrong out of Danny and that she'd be a normal little girl. I think that was her hope. And when that didn't happen and Danny was getting destructive and difficult and harder to parent as she got older, Diane sort of checked out and took care of the animals at the farm and let Bernie, her husband, do most of the taking care of Danny. This might be TMI, but we went to the state fair with them because they were showing goats or something. And Danny had to go to the bathroom. And instead of her mother taking her to the bathroom, Bernie took her into the men's trailer at the state fair. And I just thought, okay, something's broken here now, right? There's not like co-parenting going on. So we wrote that story and just kind of said where Danny was developmentally and that the family had this new life on a farm and whatever. She was not receiving therapy anymore. Once they adopted her out of the Florida foster care system, they lost all the funding for therapy because they moved to Tennessee and they'd already adopted her. So they didn't have free therapy. They didn't have free occupational or physical horseback riding. So they just stopped. So she kind of stopped developing, right? So then we waited another like 7 years. And I think I told you my son was the same age. So when he was turning 18 and about to graduate from high school, I was like, oh, I should check in on Danny and see what's happening because the few services that she did get through school, including like help after care and stuff like that, stopped when she was 18. So I was like, I need to go check back in with them. And I actually went with Bernie. Bernie had wound up putting Danny in a like a nursing home. There were other people her age, but kind of a group home for people who really needed full-time care. And he and Diane had gotten divorced. And so he was the only one still really visiting Danny. And so we went with him on on her 18th birthday and took a cupcake and went out and had Dairy Queen and went shopping at the Goodwill and bought her some toys. She wanted like toddler toys, she still hadn't really developed much past that. And so I was like, oh shoot, what's my ending here? Like, I want some hope. Everyone had such great hopes that they could save her and rescue her and it would be okay, and it wasn't. But then all of a sudden I heard her laughing, and I had never heard her laugh before ever. She would have tantrums and meltdowns before. And Bernie's like, yes, she found her laugh. And I was like, so I think that's how the 10-year story ends. Like, she's still not talking. She still can't really take care of herself. But she's not having like night terrors and she's laughing. And so, I mean, I guess that's the little tiny bit of hope.
Yeah, she's found joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she had a roommate who was about her age, who was similarly differently abled,
Yeah.
sort of similarly differently abled, but you know what I mean. And so it was almost like for the first time, she had like a friend,
Yeah, somebody that she could probably relate to.
Yeah, and connect with, even if they were just playing with Fisher Price toys,
Yeah, I think that's wonderful that you've been able to follow the story all of these years through kind of to that ending, like you have, where you really see, which of course the story's never really over, but
Right.
there has been a bow to kind of wrap up the progression of how things have gone.
I do wonder what will happen to her after Bernie passes. She's got nobody else, and he's mid to late 60s, I think. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't asked him what the long-term plan, if any, is for her, but yeah.
Is that part
He's
of the
hard to keep
story?
up with too, because the Bernie doesn't have social media. He doesn't have a cell phone. So you'd have to like call and leave a message on an answering machine that was like legit a little cassette tape, and then hope he would call you back, So
Yeah.
I usually reach out at the holidays and then around Danny's birthday.
Okay. I was gonna say, is that part of the story you would continue to follow, you think?
I don't know if I'd read another story unless something really drastically changed, but I do want to know, you know what I mean? I want to know what happened. So
Yeah. How do you feel about, like, following a story for this long? You kind of get personally attached to these sources. Would that be a good assessment?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know that I feel attached to Danny because she couldn't really attach to anything, but I definitely feel attached to Bernie, and I feel such admiration for this blue collar single dad who was just burdening this, shouldering this whole thing by himself. I think last Christmas when I talked to him, he told me he ended up marrying a woman who had a special needs son, and they met through something, to do with the kids. So I'm glad he found somebody that like can appreciate what he's going through. He's a
Yeah.
wonderful man.
Yeah. You've seen kind of a whole family's progression of life through the eyes of a journalist, and that's so
Exactly.
rare for, I feel like most of us are just on day turns, or even in a weekly story setting is about as long as we get on anything. So that's very unique.
One of my coworkers, she actually just retired, but she's still following this story. She's been following a man on death row for 25 years. Her whole career since she got here, she's been keeping up correspondence with this man on death row. So yeah, it's very unusual, I think, to have that continuity and to be at the same paper that long.
Yeah, definitely. How do you get people like Danny's family and many of your other sources to open up to you? What kind of questions do you ask them? How do you get their full character that you can tell in a story?
Yeah, I mean, they I think you probably know this in your reporting too. Like half the people are like, okay, sure, what do you need? And the other half of people are like, hell no, don't bother me. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So I try really hard, like, to come up with a pitch for them about like why I want to tell this story, why they are the perfect and only people that I can tell this story through, what's in it for them, what might happen to them as a result, whether it's good or bad, and like how it might help other people. I usually try to make that a pitch somewhere in there of like, why should you tell me the story? I know why I want it from you, right? But why should you tell it to me? So, and I learned to kind of let people drive the bus at the beginning. So I'll be like, well, where would you want to start your story? Or if you don't want to talk to me, like, why? What are you worried about? Are there things we can like work around or concessions we can make that I'm not going to do this if you let me in, for what I need? Not so much off the record stuff. I don't want anybody to be off the record with me because then I feel like I know too much and I have to use it or I should use it. You know what I mean? But like Danny's mom and dad were, or her adoptive parents were really, really concerned that we were going to make her look animalistic, that it would somehow demean her and make her look unhuman in some way. And so we talked about that a lot. And I was like, that's so not the intention of the story. I said, we want to find a way to illustrate what a feral child is and what that looks like and what you're trying to deal with, but I'm not intending to make her look animalistic. And the social worker worked through a little bit of that back and forth with us. And they didn't ask for first refusal, like, let us see the story. But they were just like, we trust you because this is something we're really worried about and concerned about. And there was one scene that we witnessed, the photographer and I witnessed, where Danny had a temper tantrum and a meltdown, and she had a diaper on still, and she took her hand in her pants and smeared poo all over the walls and the TV and the dog, and everything was covered in poo. And it was like a pretty dramatic scene, and I'm sitting there taking notes and the photographer's taking pictures, and nobody tried to stop us. They were just trying to like contain Danny, but when we started to write the story, we talked about that with my editor, and he was like, I think that's violating the animalistic concern that they had. He's like, do you have another scene that shows that she is not potty trained? And I was like, yeah, we had this really cute scene where she's sitting on a potty and Bernie's giving her M&Ms for trying to poop. He was like, oh, do that. So we just swapped out. We didn't write about the poop on the wall or the dog or the tantrum. We wrote about this little tiny quiet moment where Bernie's like, well, you can have another M&M if you sit on the potty, you know. And I think that was really another great editor call. You know, he was very conscientious about not offending them, and not violating whatever understanding we'd come to, you know.
Yeah. How, in maybe some of your other stories, have you gotten somebody that's maybe more hesitant to get deep with you, to open up? Like, you know, it's one thing to get like Danny's parents to even let you in the first place. But I think when somebody's like agreeable to do a story, but then like maybe they're just like not giving you very much, how do you dig with them?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so it's different if they're willing versus not willing, right? If they're
Right.
willing, but they're kind of like putting up a barrier,
Hmm.
I'll almost say something like that, like, man, I need a little bit more here. You know, I don't really understand. Can you elaborate? Like, or I've thought about this and I've tried to write it, but I still don't get it. I didn't do enough reporting on this, obviously. You know, like, can you really explain why or how or whatever it is? Put it on me. You know what I mean? Like, I did not do it right. Um, and I always ask who else I could or should talk to. You know, like, are there other people around you I could talk to? And then we start talking about, oh, what's my mom going to say? Oh, you know, what's my sister going to say? And sometimes that brings up other stuff too, you know. I definitely ask people about regrets. I don't think many people are going to flat out tell you when you fucked up. But I think if you say, what do you regret? It brings up a lot of that, like, self evaluation and maybe a chance to show the bruise, you know, something that's a little bit wrong with yourself without completely, you know, dismissing yourself. But like, regrets are a great question. What do you regret? What do you wish you had done differently? You know, um, what's something somebody doesn't know about you, or what's something that people don't understand about you? I think that's a good backhanded question, right? What don't people understand about you? And sometimes that opens people up to reveal things or say how they want to be perceived or whatever, you know. Or I mean, I troll everybody on social media and tell them that ahead of time, you know, and I'll be like, so I know that you are into, you know, World of Warcraft or whatever. Like, tell me what that says about you. Having some specific things that I can find that they're projecting out into the world, you know, but what does that mean? What does that say about you? And kind of mining them, you know, for that type of stuff. I also apologize. I mean, and 33 years I've been doing this, and I'll still say, oh my God, I'm so sorry to have to ask you this question. It's not comfortable, and I don't mean to make you feel bad, but my editor's really going to want to know. My editor's going to need to know, and kind of blame it on my editor, you know, or I tell my students in class, like, blame it on your professor, you know. And then that kind of allows you to let them know you're still human too. Like, maybe you're not out there with these gotcha questions. You're like trying to be kind and thoughtful, and you're apologizing a little bit for what you're about to do.
I truly love technology. I have no idea what happened to my computer.
Oh, glad you're back.
So I missed probably the end of what you were saying, but I know it was fantastic.
Wait, what were we talking about? Oh,
uh,
getting people to
digging
open
deep.
up,
Yeah.
digging deep. Yeah. Um, yeah. So, I mean, I usually kind of want to give my person the first and the last word, you know, like, what else haven't I asked you? You know, what else do people need to know about you or understand about you? So I let them start and I let them end. And then I keep a list of, well, I don't think I talked to you about this, but I have a really weird note-taking methodology where I kind of diagram my notebook.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I let people, like, keep talking. And then when I have a follow-up question, instead of stopping them to ask that follow-up question, I put a note, an arrow in the margin. And
Mhm.
that way, when I'm done with the interview, I can go back and go, hey, I have some follow-up questions. And it gives me, like, great peace of mind that I'm not going to forget to ask something, but it doesn't allow me to derail them when they're telling their story. You know what I mean? Because if you tell me you have a dog, I'm going to want to know what kind of dog it is and how old it is and what its name is and did you rescue it and does he sleep in your bed and can he catch a frisbee and, you know, all these other, like, follow-up questions. But if I start asking you those, it steers you away from your own ability to tell your narrative. So I just write those little arrows in the side, and then I get to have the last word as these follow-up detail questions type thing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's a great. I loved your little note taking.
Yeah, like I started
Library.
using those big notepads because the little skinny ones don't have enough room.
No, not at all. I fly through those. I write too big for them.
Yeah. And then also when you're trying to put your story together, you've got like 12 of them to coordinate, and
Yeah.
it's too many pages to flip through all the time.
How many times typically would you go back to somebody for an interview? I know probably just as many as it takes, but give us a roundabout.
It
Yeah.
totally depends on the deadline. It
Yeah.
completely depends on the deadline. So I mean, my minimum requirement is like an hour or two to talk to you, and then an hour or two to watch you do something if possible. If I can go be where you're doing something somewhere, and then I can turn that around in a day.
Mhm.
Maximum, gosh, I spent 3 years following this one family. I mean, I was doing all kind of other stories at the same time, but I
Sure.
went to see them at least once a month for 3 years. And they lived like 2 hours away. Danny, the girl in the window store, I spent 6 months on. Um, and some of those were interviews, and some of those were research. Some were research interviews, with experts and scientists and stuff. But I just basically have my person go like, "What's coming up in the next couple of weeks? What do you have going on? Can I be there for that doctor's appointment? Can I be there when you go to church? Can I be there for her first trip to the beach? Can I come to the state fair? And trying to get them to help me stake out opportunities that I can be there to witness something, rather than have to like recreate it all. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Mhm. That makes sense. What is it about these things, focusing on the helpers, the people in the shadows, that why is it that you want to do that versus what a lot of us are taught in journalism school? And now I know you didn't go to journalism school because it's there was no journalism at Virginia, but we're taught if it bleeds, it leads. We're supposed to do these crime stories or politics and all these, crazy breaking news that draws so many people into the industry. But, we kind of talked about your background that drew you to this, but why do you keep doing it?
Um, I think why I made that shift is a great question, because even when I was at the college paper, I only did news. I never wanted to do features. I wasn't interested. It seemed like fluff. I didn't want to go interview, the band guys. I didn't want to write about the art exhibit. I wanted to do news, 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 and I wanted to get tampons in the ladies' bathrooms. That was my big editorial push as editor of the paper. Um, but I didn't think about features or storytelling really. I didn't even know what kind of storytelling you could do for newspapers and so there's a confluence of things that happened, right? In 1996, I had my first baby. I was at a bureau on the Outer Banks. I was writing 2, 3, 4 stories a day, covering all kinds of news, and doing some investigations and stuff. But I had my first baby, and then a year and a half later, I had another baby. And then that year, 1998, Tom French won the Pulitzer Prize for a story called Angels and Demons. If you guys haven't read that, look up Angels and Demons by Tom French. It was what made me want to do this. And I did not know you could do narrative storytelling in newspapers. And it was like, I don't know, 12,000, 15,000 words, huge special section. It was the most beautiful story. And I was an English major and read like a novel, you know what I mean? But it was so well reported, and so many people just reacted to it, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. And that summer, when I was coming back from maternity leave with my second little boy, the Virginian Pilot started a narrative writing team, one of the first in the whole country. And they picked from our staff of 250 people, they picked 4 of us to become storytellers. And we were on this writing team. And then all of a sudden, instead of writing like 3 stories a day, I was writing like 1 a week, And so instead of doing like phone call interviews or like sitting in meetings, I was like, can I come hang out in your boat with you? Can I come on the duck hunt with you? And I really, that was like a huge change, in how I worked and what kind of stories I was telling. I also think becoming a mother made me not like the bleed you lead so much. It made me not want to just cover the accidents and the malfeasance and the politicians. And I think I just shifted in my brain and my heart that like, if I could write about real people, and not have to do gotcha journalism and everybody dies in every story, it would be so much more satisfying. And I was also reading to the little boys a lot of stories then. So, my novel self was 30 years old, but my little boys, I was reading these little stories, and it really kind of helped me, I guess, think into the rhythm of storytelling or see things in kids' books that help change it from a news report to a story.
you have given us some great tips today, but I know you have so many more being a professor and from your book. And I know you host a podcast, which is called Right Lane, about nonfiction storytelling in particular. Tell me, what have been a couple of your favorite episodes from the podcast, and some of maybe your favorite tips that you've given?
Okay, so the number one listened to podcast is called We Don't Suck That Bad, or maybe it's called I Don't Suck That Bad. And it is from I made my best friend at the newspaper. She was there the same time I was, 20 something years. And she was always flogging herself. Like she came from more of a metro investigation background. And when she got on our team, our enterprise storytelling team here in Florida, she was like, I'm not worthy. I suck. I can't do this. I'm terrible. And she was just very self-deprecating. So one year after the holidays, we came back, I put a sticky note on her computer and it said, I don't suck that bad. And that year she won the Pulitzer Prize. And so I still tell her, like, I gave you the confidence to do that, but we did a really fun podcast episode. I think we drank a bottle of wine while we did it or whatever, too, just kind of talking about like self-doubt and self-criticism and kind of the imposter syndrome and, feeling like you're not worthy either of your story or your organization or your characters that you're representing. And that podcast has gotten more listens than any others. So I think we might have tapped into something that other people struggle with, but don't really want to talk about. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I've had those feelings for my whole career, but I would never walk around the newsroom going, I suck, I'm terrible, I suck. And Leonora had no problem like putting that all out there. You know what I mean? So that's probably my favorite one. I did a podcast with my son about acting and writing and inhabiting characters, which was super fun. What else? There's a couple on voice that I think came out pretty good. Or we talked about finding the writer's voice. Um, there's one on, my editor did most of the talking on this one, but like developing a newsroom culture that like appreciates narrative nonfiction. So you don't have all your editors saying like, oh, you can't do that here, or we don't do that at the Post or whatever. And so I think that one got a lot of, especially editors, listening to that one. Yeah, and some of the ones like the one I did about my son who lost his little stuffed elephant, the first person one, that was just so fun because that story is precious to me, but I got to read it as well, which was nice. Some of this podcasts, I read the story if it's short enough and then we talk about it. So
That's
they're
cool.
all like 20 minutes long.
Yeah, I think that's such a, I love that in the world that we have today, we've kind of been able to convert some of what we've done, like in past journalism, even to today's digital world in podcasts, or, people are reading their own books nowadays and that sort of thing. So I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, and
Oh,
each one of the book has 24 chapters, 24 stories. So each chapter is a story with annotations, and then there's kind of like how I got it and what happened after. But there's also a podcast that goes with each chapter. So if you're reading it and you want to hear it instead, or you're riding in the car or walking the dog or whatever, there's a corresponding, not the same content, but a corresponding chapter in the podcast for each book chapter.
that's awesome. I think I told you when you and I talked last and you told me about that. I will definitely be listening to that because I have a long commute to and from Nashville. So I know all the people who are commuting to and from the city are going to need to go listen to that. So
I think I told you this as well. We did 300 and something episodes. And as you guys all know, not everything is worth it, right? Not everything comes out great. So we reorganized and did selective so that there's 100 episodes, I think now, maybe not even that many, but they're the ones that are better. Like they're not embarrassing. So you don't have to like slog through ones, that, and they're also categorized, which is helpful, I think, because they weren't before. So you can look under there's drop down tabs for like writing and editing and inspiration and voice and stuff like that. So hopefully you can find something helpful.
that's super helpful. Is there one that if you only could tell people to go listen to one right now, you would say?
Oh, I would say the finding ideas one, maybe.
Okay.
Because I think that's one thing. Voice and finding ideas are two things we never really talk about, both in school and in newsrooms. And so I think that one might spark that one might have some takeaways that people can actually use in their communities or for whatever they're writing about.
Yeah. And then to kind of wrap it all up, I've asked you for your advice in general, kind of throughout the whole thing, but specifically for young journalists out there who are just starting out, what advice do you have for them?
Mm. So I guess number one is be brave. don't not ask hard questions. Like the worst thing you can do is walk away from an interview or hang up the phone and realize you didn't ask the hard questions because you were chicken. So be brave, even if it means that you have to like couch it in, I'm sorry, my editor's making you ask this, or I feel really bad about asking this, but be brave. Don't judge, right? Try to make sure you're going in with open mind, because you don't ever know where people have come from or what's happened to them. I wrote one story called The Worst Mom in Florida, which is what all the other news outlets called her. And her story was one of the saddest stories I've ever heard, but no one had bothered to talk to her, you know? So don't judge, write about what you know, not exclusively, but if you're super passionate about horseback riding or macrame or beer brewing, make sure you like tap into that expertise, because especially for feature stories, you know, if you can bring some expertise to something, it really makes, if you care about it, it's going to make your readers care about it a lot more, you know what I mean? And then always have something that you're excited about or interested in, even if you're having to do what your editors want or what the daily news grind throws at you. Have some kind of project out there on the back burner that you're super excited about when you're waiting for a phone call or you're between interviews, and you can just like chip away at it. Even if your editor hasn't said yes, even if you haven't even told your editor. I think the way that I went from being a bureau reporter writing 3 or 4 stories a day to getting on this narrative team was I took my vacations, I took my weekends, I went and wrote stories that I wanted to write because I wasn't given the time to do that. And not to say that you have to, you know, give all of that away, but like if you have something you're super passionate about it, pursue it. Don't let somebody tell you no.
Well, I think that that's a good point too, like to people who say like if you enjoy what you do, you never work a day in your life, you know, like it's not about going and, you know, working in your off time, but it's about like, you know, we all have a passion for this. We enjoy what we do usually. And so like what's that one piece that maybe you don't get to do enough of that you actually would get some enjoyment out of going and doing on your own?
Right, exactly. And it's also, I think about, I tell my students, like I think about being a journalist, especially like a general assignment journalist, right? It's kind of like being a paramedic. Like you're always on call. Just because you're out at Applebee's with your boyfriend doesn't mean you're not going to go help that person who's choking. Just because you're out with your kid at the zoo doesn't mean you can't find a story because you see something, you know? So I think always having your radar up to like, if it's good enough for you to go back and tell your husband or your kids or your neighbor, like, oh my God, this story happened, it's probably good enough to at least make a phone call or two and see if you can find a way to tell it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of having that creative antenna always up, I think, is something that a lot of journalists eh, can't help but do.
Yeah, and it's also a great way to, if your editors like pitching stories that you don't want to do, if you've got, but I can do this, you know, have an alternative
Hmm.
to pitch out there and see. I know sometimes they get you out of bad assignments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Lane, is there anything tonight that I didn't ask you that you would like to kind of end on? You said you always like to end giving your people the last word, so I'm gonna do the same to you.
You, um, I guess I just hope that people, you know, I know there's fewer people in newsrooms. I know there's fewer inches per story. I know there's fewer pages in magazines. But I hope that people don't think they can't try narrative because it has to be some long 8,000 word project. You know, you can do narrative in little chunks and pieces. You can do narrative off a school board story. You can do narrative off of a car crash. You know, it just having the desire to tell a story instead of impart information, you can flex those muscles in small ways, you know, and still impress yourself and your editor and interest the readers, you know. So even if it's just a paragraph or two, if you feel like trying narrative, give it a shot. Don't let the editors tell you you can't.
Thank you so much, Lane. I love that. That's a great piece of advice to end on. To everybody who goes back and watches this later, we thank you so much for watching our conversation, and we hope you get some good tips out of it. There will be a few documents linked from some of the tips that Lane gave us as we talked today down in the YouTube description. So go check those out. Thanks so much, everyone.
Nicole, thank you so much for having me, you guys. And if anybody wants to join our Right Lane Facebook group, we have journalists from all over the country that weigh in with ideas and visions and thoughts and stuff. So we'd love to have you join.
I'll be joining.
Thanks, Nicole. Have a great night.
Bye, guys.